Dale Barr, whom you just met, is from Cornwall. She is married and mother of 4 children on earth and 6 babies in heaven. Dale has been a registered nurse for 32 years, and for the past 6.5 years, she has been working as a nurse at Cornwall Hospice. She has been a board member of Pro-Life Cornwall for the past several years. Dale's passion for the pro-life movement grew when she began healing 20 years ago, 16 years after her abortion, when she was just 16 years old. Now she takes advantage of every opportunity she has to share her story in order to educate the public that abortion is harmful emotionally, physically, and spiritually to men, women, and families. Dale is Ontario's regional coordinator for the Silent No More awareness campaign and has shared her testimony of her abortion at Ottawa's annual March for Life for the past 12 years, as well as many other places in Canada and the United States. Since 2009, Dale has helped facilitate at Rachel's Vineyard, a post-abortion healing center in Saranac Lake, New York. Angelina Steenstra is the national coordinator for the Silent No More awareness campaign. Working with regional coordinators, she promotes the spread of the campaign throughout the country, letting those who are hurting from abortion know that there is help available. Angelina had an abortion at the age of 15 after becoming pregnant through a date rape. Her journey of healing, along with her background in social services, led her to co-found Second Chance Post-Abortion Healing in 1991, an outreach ministry in the Greater Toronto Area. With the support of her husband Walter, Angelina brings a message of hope and healing to many around the world. Please welcome Dale and Angelina.
Okay, so we've named our presentation Healing the Shockwaves of Abortion, and we are talking about the Silent No More awareness campaign, which Angelina and I both belong to for 12 years now, right? Just an overview. I'm going to give some facts about abortion. I'm going to briefly go over the types of abortions. And just a note of caution. It is a very touchy, emotional subject. So there may be some of you who, with some of the information I'm sharing, feel a little uncomfortable or queasy, or and that's because abortion should make us uncomfortable and queasy. It's not a very nice subject. So if you ever feel throughout the day that you need to talk to someone, feel free to come to myself, and I could help you out, or I can find someone here today that could maybe spend some time with you, okay? So if you have any feelings that you want to deal with, feel free to come to us. We will talk about the Silent No More awareness campaign and another initiative that the campaign started in January of 2015 called Healing the Shockwaves. At that point, after that, Angelina and I will both give our personal testimony of our experience with abortion. And at the end, I'm going to talk just briefly about Rachel's Vineyard, which is the healing program that I help facilitate down in Saranac Lake. So a lot of information here I'm going to quickly go over. And you have a little booklet that you got this morning, hopefully, and if you feel like jotting facts down, you can do that. So abortion in Canada was made legal with some restrictions in 1969, but since 1988, it's been legal with no restrictions throughout all 9 months of pregnancy. We are the only country in the Western world and one of a few countries worldwide, along with China and North Korea, that do not have any legal restrictions on abortion. 1 in 4 pregnancies in Canada will be aborted, and most of them are funded by our tax-paying dollars. In Ontario here, our OHIP pays for the abortions. Approximately 100,000 abortions take place every year in Canada, which translates into 300 a day, or 1 every 12 minutes. More than 3 million, and probably closer to 4 million, abortions have occurred since 1969 in Canada. In 2009, the Institute for Health Information, reported 93,755 abortions, based on an average cost of $800 per abortion that would cost taxpayers approximately $75 million a year. Worldwide, 42 million babies are aborted each year. Since Roe versus Wade in the US, so since 1973, approximately 55 million, and I think it's gone over that, 55 million abortions have taken place, and it's approximately 4,000 a day in the US. Almost half of all abortions are repeat abortions, and the majority of women who are obtaining them are in their 20s. 2/3 of women who have abortions report some level of pressure or coercion by someone close to them, maybe a boyfriend, a husband, parents. Someone that they're seeking help from is counseling them. So 2/3 almost feel pressured into having it. And approximately 90% of the abortions in Canada are done in the first 3 months. Some abortion aftermath, possible emotional and psychological problems. There's a whole list of things that can happen afterwards. A lot of women will say, oh, I felt fine right afterwards, kind of relieved. But then usually a lot of signs and symptoms don't show up. There's quite often a delay. And sometimes it's 5, 10, 15 years before the woman realizes or acknowledges that, wow, maybe it's the abortion that's been causing all these problems in my life. So there's a whole list of things I've mentioned there: grief, depression, suicidal tendencies, guilt and shame, inability to forgive self, anger, a feeling of numbness, promiscuity, eating disorders, drug and alcohol abuse, lowered self-esteem, and trouble with relationships in general, nightmares, panic attacks, flashbacks. Quite often, after the woman has an abortion, she'll want to make up for it. So they call it like an atonement pregnancy. So often she will get pregnant again right away to kind of make up for what she felt she did wrong with the abortion. Some physical complications, immediate things that can happen: uterine perforation during the abortion, hemorrhage, cervical trauma, and infection. And long-term infertility, there's increased risk of miscarriages, premature births, and ectopic pregnancies in subsequent pregnancies. And studies show that there's a link between abortion and breast cancer. And I've listed a couple of doctors there who have done extensive research on this issue. So maybe when you have some time, if you're interested and wanted to look those two doctors up, you could look at some of the studies that they've done. So a list of why women choose abortion. Often whenever we talk to people, Angelina and I, we'll hear them say, well, I'm against abortion except in the case of rape or incest. But as you can see by the stats here, and this is from this Guttmacher Institute, only 1% of the abortions are done in the case of rape or incest. So most of the reasons why, as you can see at the top of the list, are inadequate finances, not ready for responsibility, the woman's life would be changed too much, problems with relationships, unmarried at the time, too young. So you can see all those other things there. So a little visual of where abortions are taking place in Canada. So all the provinces listed, and then the most abortions in clinics and hospitals are taking place in Quebec and Ontario, followed by BC. And you can see by the visual that PEI has no abortions, except just recently, I believe they ruled that they are going to start doing abortions on the island for the first time in many, many years. Different types of abortions. There's surgical abortions. So 90% of them, we said, were done in the first trimester. So most times this is done by what they call a suction aspiration. And the woman is either given a general or a local anesthetic. In clinics, most times they don't receive any kind of anesthetic, maybe a local. And the woman's cervix is dilated abnormally because when she's pregnant, it's meant to stay very closed, very tight to keep the baby in. So they either put medicine or dilate it by force with instruments that they put in, and they just make bigger instruments and make it bigger, and stretch it until they can put a tube in, and they hook it up to a vacuum that's been said to be, it's almost 30 times stronger than your household vacuum. And they basically just suck the contents of the unborn child through that tube and into a bottle on the floor at the woman's feet. And the method changes as the gestation of the baby grows. So next is a D&C, not to be confused with a therapeutic D&C, because sometimes women have to have a D&C for medical reasons. And then a D&E is done on babies up to 18 weeks. And again, they dilate the cervix with force, and they literally take instruments and take off the limbs of the child and pull them out piece by piece because they're getting bigger. They can't go down that little tube that they used in the first one. And the next one is a saline abortion, which is done after 16 weeks, and they inject a very concentrated salt solution right into the amniotic fluid, and it literally burns the baby from inside, their lungs and everything. It burns them from the inside out. And then a partial birth abortion is done on full-term or very late-term third trimester abortions, where they deliver the baby. And you can Google partial birth abortion and it'll actually have a visual of what they do, but they deliver the baby into the doctor's hands, feet first, with the face down. And once they have the whole body out, except the head, the doctor puts a pair of scissors in the back of the baby's head and makes an incision and puts a tube in there and literally takes out their brain, and their skull collapses. That's the only way they deliver the head. There was a ban on that in 2003 in the US when George Bush was president. But there is still partial birth abortions going on. A lot of states have, exceptions where they will do them. And again, in Canada, I would assume they're probably being done. I'm not saying there's a lot of them, but I'm sure in some situations they probably are doing them. And then there's chemical abortions, which is coming to the forefront. Maybe some of you have read about RU486. It's a new drug combination that's been made legal by Health Canada, has been passed that it's going to be sold in Canada beginning in late summer or early fall. So women will be able to get these 2 combination drugs from their doctors by prescription, take it home, and the first one is, in the past they've used methotrexate and misoprostol. And methotrexate is a chemotherapy drug, or some people are on it for arthritis, bad rheumatoid arthritis. And the second one, which is the RU486, that is going to be used a lot more often, the mifepristone as well is a chemotherapy drug. So it will be the first drug that the woman takes, which will cause the demise of the unborn child. And the second drug that she takes a few days later, misoprostol, the other name for it is Cytotec, and it was actually, it was a drug for people who had stomach ulcers, Cytotec. But they found out that it causes severe abdominal pain and contractions. So they use it, and they give the woman high doses where it will cause abdominal contractions, and she will expel the contents of her uterus and expel the baby. It's only supposed to be used up to 7 weeks. But I was reading, and I'm seeing parts where, it can be pushed to like 9 weeks, 10 weeks. So there's a lot of risks with this. Of hemorrhage and infection, and of course women have died using this combination. I mean, basically they're given the drugs and they go home. So I think when Angelina talks later, she has a story that she can tell about somebody she knew that had a chemical abortion. We're going to talk just a bit about the campaign that we're involved with.
The National Silent No More Awareness Campaign was founded in 2002 by Georgette Forney. And Georgette Forney is the president of Anglicans for Life in the United States. And her experience was having an abortion at the age of 16. And it caused her to want to reach out to women who had experienced abortion. And little did they know when they began the campaign in 2002 that it would evolve into where it is today. In the beginning, they thought it would be women who would come forward and want to share their regret. But as time went on, it turned out that fathers wanted to talk about their regret in being involved in abortion. And then from there, we've grown into what is called healing the shockwaves of abortion. This is tricky, I can't see the slides, so I'm going to turn.
No, here. Okay.
So it's a campaign, it's not an organization. Think of it much like MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Driving. So what do we want to do? We want to increase the awareness in the mind of the public about the devastation that abortion brings into people's lives. And the campaign's been going now since 2002. So we've held 1,582 gatherings in 17 countries and 48 states, with almost 6,000 men and women participating in these gatherings, sharing their stories about what abortion did to their life. And for the most part, if you go to our website, silentnomoorawareness.com, you can read those stories, and you'll see that there's similarities in the stories. The details are different, but you can almost draw a line through everyone's story and see how much we all have in common. There are 2,405 testimonies posted on our website, with a number of those being shared by video, almost 400 videos. And we have a Canadian. If you go to the website and you put in Silent No More Awareness Canada, the homepage that will come up is the Canadian homepage. And we have Canadian testimonies there. The other thing that can happen with the campaign is that people can register the regret without breaking their anonymity. Not everybody is ready to share publicly. And first of all, for a person to share publicly with the campaign, they need to have gone through a journey of healing. The person doesn't want to be in a state of, I would call raw pain, standing before people telling their story. It has to be something that people have processed, have worked through, and have moved on to the place where they can share without it having a devastating effect as they're sharing. So, some key points about the campaign is that we often hear, the theory of why abortion should work. But what we found through the Silent No More Awareness campaign is that experience is totally different than the rhetoric. So we want to bring the voices of men and women to the streets. We host gatherings in all sorts of venues, university campuses, colleges. Our biggest event every year is the March for Life in Ottawa, where this year we will have about 14 men and women sharing their testimony, one right after the other. We're non-denominational. There are thousands of people that are part of the campaign, and there are some that are, well known. For instance, Dr. Alveda King, the niece of Martin Luther King Jr., came out many years ago sharing about her experience of abortion. More recently, Julia Holcomb, who was the girlfriend of Steven Tyler from Aerosmith, a group that some people might remember. She came out and shared about her abortion experience. It's online. Actually, it was quite a horrible experience that she went through. So we're not a political or a legal, that's not our interest. Our interest is to reach out to those that are hurting, to let them know that help is available, and to offer a platform for men and women who are ready to share. We educate the public through our experience, and you might wonder, what is there to educate about? Well, abortion hits us on every level of our being, in our emotional life, our spiritual life, in our relationships. It has can leave physical effects in a person's life. And basically, we want people to realize that abortion is not a quick fix. It has consequences, and those consequences can reach far into the future. Ultimately, our hope is that abortion will become unthinkable, and people will not choose abortion. And we can say that through this campaign, we know that a number of children have been born that otherwise were going to be aborted. But because people heard our stories, they had a change of heart. And one story in particular, a few years ago, I was giving a presentation. I had 3 presentations back to back at a high school in Richmond Hill. And the first presentation, 8:30 in the morning, there was a young man in class. And after he heard my story, he went up to his teacher and said, "Right now, I have a friend. She's 20 years old, and she's on the subway going to an abortion facility downtown Toronto. What can I do?" Basically, we said, "Call her. Say, don't do it." So he called her, and he said that to her, and she said, "Why?" And he said, "Because there's 2 women here who regret their abortion." And then she said, "Why? Why do they regret it?" So Debbie Fisher, who's with the Silent No More Awareness campaign, was able to get her on the telephone and start talking to her. She said, "I'd like to make you a proposition. Stop what you're doing right now and take an hour and come and listen to me. Get off the subway, come to this high school, and talk to me." So Margarita, we have permission to share her story. Margarita got off the subway. She came to St. Teresa's Catholic High School in Richmond Hill, and she talked to Debbie. And by 3 o'clock that afternoon, Margarita had chosen life for her little girl. And she gave her testimony at the March for Life in 2013, holding her little girl. That's the daughter of the Silent.
Good. This is a picture of my youngest, Isaac, with me at the March for Life in Washington, D.C. in 2014. And Jessie, my daughter, came with me in 2011 and 2015. So just a couple of slides I have on the Shockwaves initiative. So it's an initiative that started January of last year. And abortion is like an earthquake whose violent shockwaves unsettle the earth for many miles around. The shockwaves of abortion extend far beyond the epicenter of the procedure. The loss of one child to abortion impacts everyone involved: the mother and father, the grandparents, siblings, family and friends, and even the people who work in the abortion clinics or the hospitals, and the abortionists themselves. We tend to think of it as a private and personal decision, none of our business, right? But the truth is, many of us have been impacted by abortion of an unborn child. This new initiative seeks to give a voice to all those who regret having any part in an abortion, so that they can mourn the loss of each innocent child. So what Priests for Life, along with Silent No More, they decided that each month they would have a focus group that they would focus that whole month on. So they just flood the media and the internet with resources for April, it's healing of the siblings. Whenever my daughter was in, there's a picture coming up, when my daughter was in Washington, D.C., she held one of their signs, the new signs for the new campaign, the new initiative that said, "I mourn the loss of my aborted sibling." In May, it's healing for the mothers, and in June, because of Father's Day, the healing of the fathers. So as you can see up there, every month they have a different focus group. And they have all kinds of resources available to help people. There's a picture of Janet Marana, who is the executive director for Priests for Life, and she was instrumental in starting the Silent No More awareness campaign. And she has her own story about her daughter who had an abortion. So she's holding the sign, "I regret losing my grandchild." And then you can see a whole bunch of the other signs that there's an abortionist now that's a spokesperson for Silent No More. Dr. Anthony Levantino, he's in the center there, and then Janet, and then there's my daughter Jessie holding her sign. Okay, so we've come to the part where Angelina and I will give our personal testimonies. Okay. Even though it's been 36 years since the abortion, I truly believe that this is something that God wants me to do, so I take advantage of every opportunity. But it still is a very difficult thing to do, and lots of times when I give my testimony, it kind of, sometimes I can go right back to that time in my life and kind of relive it. So my childhood was unremarkable, growing up with my mom, my dad, 2 brothers and 2 sisters. I became sexually active early in my teens and became pregnant at 16. After a doctor confirmed I was pregnant, I then undertook the difficult task of telling my parents. They reacted as I had anticipated, which was with much shock, anger, and disappointment. Weeks later, my case was presented to a panel of doctors called a therapeutic abortion committee. My abortion was in 1979, and there were still restrictions at that time. 4 doctors signed a paper on November 20th, 1979, that stated a therapeutic abortion was indicated as the continuation of pregnancy would or would likely endanger the life or health of the patient. I know the doctors signed that paper because I actually have a copy of my record. I asked for a copy of my chart from the abortion several years ago because I had so many unanswered questions. I guess that's the nurse in me that wanted to see my medical chart. Many details of that experience are still missing for me, so I have no recollection of whether or not I was present during that meeting with the doctors. And my next memory is of the day that the abortion was performed in the General Hospital on November 27th, 1979. The abortion was performed under a general anesthetic, and when I came to, I was back in my room, still in a fog from the anesthetic. I heard the nurse say, "It's all over." I remember feeling a profound sense of loss and sadness. I was comforted by the presence of my dad, who was in the room with me at the time. But I was heartbroken that my mom wasn't there with me. I was a changed person when I left the hospital that day. I went home that evening, and I was sworn to secrecy by my parents. I buried my secret deep down inside, where it would stay locked up for the next 9 years. The abortion was a catalyst that brought about significant change in my life. I went from being a straight A student in grade 11 to barely passing in grade 12. I began to smoke cigarettes, do drugs, drink excessively. I became promiscuous and drifted from one failed relationship to another. The behavior I was exhibiting was really an attempt to cover up the immense burden that I was feeling and to numb the pain deep down inside. This path of destruction continued into my college years. When I think back to those days, I am amazed and very grateful that I succeeded in becoming a nurse. I married at 25, and my husband and I decided to start a family right away. However, we encountered many difficulties. I miscarried 4 times in the first few years of our marriage, and once again later on. I believe the miscarriages were a result of having the abortion, but after much perseverance and faith, we were blessed with 4 beautiful children. I have suffered bouts of depression for 30 years following the abortion and have had trouble with relationships, especially the relationship between my mother and myself. After the abortion, there was a massive barrier put between us. She was not with me that day, and I remember feeling abandoned. I longed to hear her say that she loved me unconditionally, but that never happened. And she passed away in November 2006. And we never did get to have that heart-to-heart talk. See, the guilt and shame from abortion can keep a mother and a daughter from talking to each other. For 28 years it had been. Women are told that the abortion will not affect their life afterwards and that everything will return to normal. This statement could not be further from the truth, because once you have an abortion, things will never be as they were before. It's been 36 years since my abortion, and it still affects my life at times. I say this for different reasons. One example is 5 years ago, while I was at the hospice, I went and took a short job stint. They were opening a floor at the general hospital that was like a transitional care unit for people who were maybe stroke victims that were trying to get back on their feet. So I went over there and worked there for almost a year on that unit. And, you know, all of a sudden, I found myself suddenly preoccupied with thoughts of the abortion, wondering, where was I in this hospital? What room was I in? And because I had my chart, because I'm a nurse and know how to read the chart and look at everything, I found out what room I was in the hospital, and I found out on a night shift, a guard, very strange circumstances one night, he took me. I said I had there was no surgeries being done at the general anymore. There was only clinics on that floor. And so at nighttime, everything was closed down and the floor was quiet. So one night I asked this guard, I said, do you think you could take me to a room on second floor where I had a very traumatic surgery when I was 16, and I'm wondering if I could go and see where that room is? And he said, sure. And I had never seen this guard before either. He just showed up that night, and it was actually a shift that he wasn't supposed to work. He never hardly worked at the General. So he took me there, and he let me into the OR. And I remember walking, and it's all quiet, and nothing was in there. And I remember looking up at the number on the door, Suite 204, and that's the operating room that I was in. And I just stood there and remembered thinking how cold and dark it was, and thinking that's how I felt on that day. And he kind of disappeared into the background and kind of just let me be. And then he appeared again and said, do you want to go anywhere else? And there was the recovery room that I was in after, so he took me there too. And again, I just went right back to that day, and kind of, I didn't say or do anything, didn't cry or anything. I didn't want to show him that I was, really upset, but it was very strange. It was just like he let me be and just let me live in the moment. And then he said, "Are you okay now?" And I said, "Yeah." So I went back to my floor, and he said to me, and the funny thing was too, his name was Grant, like my second son. And he said, "If you ever want to go back to those rooms," he said, "on nights or something, if I'm around," he said, "just ask me and I'll take you." The other thing that stands out is there's a doctor who's done extensive research, Dr. Philip Ney, and he is in British Columbia, and he's actually written many books, and one of them's holding up the projector here. If you want to look at it later, it's called Deeply Damaged, and he has done a lot of research on child psychology. He worked with a lot of children who had been siblings of babies. They had a sibling that was aborted at one time. And he believes that siblings who, they can often feel or have what he calls survivor syndrome, abortion survivor syndrome. So I often wondered about my son, my oldest, and he knows I tell this story. Out of the 4 kids I have, he was the one that he had a very difficult time, and still does, telling me he loves me. He actually has a hard time saying, "I love you, Mom." And for a long time, I'd pick at him and, "Dylan, tell me, I love you, tell me you love me." And he'd just say, "Yeah, Mom, me too," or he'd kind of snicker. And many thoughts started coming to me. He's the oldest. He's the firstborn after the abortion. And this doctor believes that quite often they are the ones affected, maybe most, because you carry with you all that grief from the abortion, and it can sometimes get passed on to the firstborn. And he is aware, my kids are all aware that I had the abortion. So he's the one also who would never come. I've been giving my testimony on Parliament Hill in Ottawa for 10 years, and I always invite the kids to come. And the other 3 have been, once, twice, numerous times, the other 2, the younger ones. But Dylan had never been, ever, and even up to 2 years ago. And I would always invite him, but he would always say, "No, I have to work," or "I have something going on," and just one time I had this this thought that he's affected by the abortion, whether it's some anger there at me or... So one day when I was driving him back to Ottawa, we had, that time, that 45 minutes to be in the car together and talk a couple of years ago. I asked him, I told him all about this doctor and all the research he had done on siblings and how they may be affected if their parent aborted one of their siblings. And I just told him, it's okay if you're angry at me for what I did. And he didn't, for the whole time, I might have talked like 10 minutes. He didn't say a word, he just listened. And then at the end, I just was honest with him, and I said, if you're angry, it's okay to feel that way, And I said, it's good to talk about it, though. And I said to him, you never tell me you love me, and I just wonder if it's part of that, And then, the conversation ended, and there was a, period of silence. And then I just said to him, I said, Dylan, I love you very much, I apologized. And he said, me too, Mom. And I said, well, can you say the words? And he looked right at me, and he said, Mom, I love you. So in my heart, I know God was showing me that he was having trouble, and that because I brought it up and opened the door for him and let him talk, he did express that there was something there. And so 2 years ago, that was the first time him and his girlfriend came to the march. And they marched with us on the streets of Ottawa and held signs that said, women do regret. And he heard my testimony for the first time. And that night he left shortly after the testimony. And that night on Facebook, about an hour later, he made a post. My husband said, you're going to be happy, proud of your son. I'm so emotional. I'm like this I'm very emotional anyway, but when I talk about this, I can shed an ocean of tears. He wrote on Facebook, so proud of my mother who gave her testimony in front of thousands on Parliament Hill today. You did an amazing job, and we are all proud of you and proud of the work you do for pro-life, and we all love you, Dylan. And very shortly after that, I had a presentation at Ottawa U where I would be presenting my testimony, and Dylan and his girlfriend showed up. She went to school there. They showed up on their own without being invited. So healing is taking place. And that's what this Healing the Shockwaves is all about. There are so many people that are hurting out there. And we just keep going on and on with our daily, but we need to really dialogue about it and talk with people and, just sort out some of those feelings. The final incidents of healing the shockwaves in my family, my mom is gone, so I can't do anything there. But my dad, who also never talked to me in 30 years, a couple of years back, calls me up one day. My mom had a devotion to Our Lady of the Snows in Belleville, Illinois. And my dad calls me one day and says, Dale, do you think you can drive me to Belleville, Illinois? I'm like, Dad, I looked it up. I said, yeah, okay, I'll call you back. I looked it up. It's like a 20-hour drive. I can't even drive to Ottawa without being tired. Anyway, I had a week off coming up, and my husband said, Dale, he's asking you to take him somewhere. You gotta go with him. So I took him, and I drove 10 hours one day all the way to, is it Sault Ste. Marie? The crossing there. Anyway, I drove 10 hours one day, and then I drove 10 hours all the way to Belleville, Illinois. We stayed for 3 days, and I drove 10 hours back to that point and 10 hours home. And I wasn't tired. And on that trip, on the way home, on the 401, we saw a really bad car accident. And he said, do you think most people are going to die suddenly and not be able to talk to their loved ones? And I said, well, there's a possibility that could happen. You know, we don't know how we're going to die or who's going to be around. And I said, why? I said, do you ask? Like, is there something that you want to talk about? And I just, I said, if we can be around, we're going to be around with you, Dad, whenever you're getting close. If we have the awareness that time is coming, we'll be there for you. But I said, is there something that you wanted to talk about? Anyway, a big pause. And so he wasn't saying anything, so I just said, I brought up the abortion, and I said, if you could go back and change anything, what would you have done? Or is there something you want to say? And I was driving, but he reached out for my hand. I think we were around Kingston. And he said, if I could change anything, I would let you make the decision. Because I always thought I loved kids. And that if I would have had the support, if my parents would have had the support, if we wouldn't have been coerced or pushed into that decision, that maybe I would have that child and they would have their grandchild. So he said, I would have let you have part in making the decision. And he held my hand so tight all the way home from Kingston. He wouldn't let it go. So it's another example of this healing of the shock waves and opening the door to people who have been affected. Because maybe that's what they need us to do, is to talk about it. So you see, the abortion still affects my life, even 36 years later. The healing is an ongoing process. For more than 20 years, the abortion caused many damaging effects in my life. But for the past 12, God has transformed it into something good. Reminds me of that verse, Romans 8:28. God causes all things to work together for good for those who love the Lord. I have found love and forgiveness through the church and through organizations such as Rachel's Vineyard and Silent No More. I went to a retreat myself for healing in 2008, and when I left, they invited me to be part of their team, and I have been the facilitator with them for the last 7 years. Amazing things go on at those retreats. And I've met so many wonderful people in the pro-life movement and through Silent No More. My very dear friend here, who's been a big part of who I am today. I am passionate about telling my story because I want to reach out to people who are hurting, to love and encourage them. I want to educate the public that abortion is harmful, emotionally, physically, and spiritually, to men, women, and families. And I want to help others avoid the pain of abortion. And that is why I will be silent no more. Thank you.